just wanted to take a quick moment to welcome everyone, and just remind everybody the importance of our government affairs efforts between the local and state associations. I think, as we all know now more than ever, we need to maintain a focus on some of these key legislations and partnerships with officials. So these hot topic sessions are a great way to keep our industry informed. And just with that, would love to introduce our host today, Karina Guerreri. She's the Director of Project Management at TriPoint. She also sits as our Vice Chair of the Associates Council. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Karina.
Thanks, Adam. I'd like to introduce Nick Camarata and Dan Dunmoyer from CVIA. And you guys, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with the North State BIA membership on all things advocacy that you do on our behalf. We really appreciate it. So let me start with Nick. Nick, I understand that CBIA categorizes all the bills that are proposed each legislative cycle into housing killers and housing creators. I wondered if you could tell us what bills you're monitoring this cycle and tell us which ones are going to be most impactful to our industry.
I'm happy to do that. So I think the way I'd like to start is with some broad themes, and I think what I'll do is give you the themes because there are sometimes multiple bills that deal with the same subject matter. Mm-hmm. And one of them that I will, and so for those people who stick around or who join late, I'll begin with the bad bills, and I'll save the best for last. How about that?
That sounds good.
To end
like a headliner.
Yeah.
End on a high note. But I'd say that, we do have a couple of bills left over from last year that we have in the housing killer category. And the first one that I would mention is SB 12. It's the Senator McGuire's wildfire bill, which is just a confusing mess that is designed, instead of getting wildfire protection for people who live in these communities, is to simply stop the communities from being built. He's expressed that as his intent. That's not an accident. But another bill that's left over is AB 1001 by Cristina Garcia, and she has earned 3 housing killer bills in her portfolio, all of which deal with the same theme. And it's a broader theme because there's another legislator, Ms. Reyes, who also has a bill in the same area. And what's going on here is, in Southern California, there are a number of places where there are warehouse developments and that are going in near housing. And that's causing problems for the air quality and for the residents in the area, who are largely disadvantaged communities of color, low-income communities. And these are the people Ms. Garcia is advocating for to fix the problem. The approach, though, has been to do one of several things: either to simply say you can't build the housing here, or you can't build the warehouses here, or the logistics centers. And logistics is broadly defined. It could be a FedEx Kinko's, it could be a grocery store, it could be a UPS store, anything where you're moving product to consumers. And there's a bill that Ms. Reyes has, 2840, also a housing killer and a job killer. And this one in particular tries to solve the problem by simply saying, well, we're not telling you you can't build the warehouse. You just have to build the project with skilled and trained labor, which is union labor.
Interesting.
which if you don't see the connection between using union labor and cleaning the air automatically by who builds it, well, you've got company, because we don't see it either. And so the whole friction that's caused by this interaction between warehouses, logistical uses, and housing is the theme of several of those bills. I would say another big theme, of course, is transportation. And what they're trying to do here with transportation is to accomplish, at least in the name of accomplishing, the state's greenhouse gas emission goals. They have noticed that local transportation projects are not consistent with the regional transportation plans and the sustainable community strategy, nor are they necessarily consistent with Caltrans policy and their climate action plan for transportation infrastructure, nor are they necessarily consistent with the Global Warming Solutions Act back from 2006, AB 32. And the scoping plan that CARB comes up with. And so there are a number of bills that are trying to align all of those types of transportation plans. It is a top-down approach. It's not a bottom-up approach. So, now you typically build transportation based on what the local demand is. What it would become is everything has to be consistent with these state level plans. And in particular, what that means is that if you ever want to lose sleep, take a look at some of Caltrans documents on what they're proposing. Because in the name of climate change, what they're proposing is to take the freeways and tear up lanes. They have brought back the concept of road diet, and they are explicit about it. We're going to tear up lanes, and we're going to replant those lanes as carbon sequestering vegetation in order to constrain traffic flow, to make it so difficult for you to use those roads that you will use public mass transit. Unfortunately, the cost to build a statewide public transit using electric powered trains and electric powered buses, zero emission vehicles, all that sort of stuff, there is no funding for that.
Right.
And they know that that would be politically unpopular. But at some point, they're going to have to face that, because as fuel economy increases, they're selling less gas, collecting less gas taxes, which is what is used to repair the roads today. So the idea here, of course, would be to get rid of roads, not just freeways, but boulevards and that sort of thing, and to abandon those roads and to sell them or lease them for affordable housing. And again, urban parks and carbon sequestration purposes. So I would say that there are a number of bills, some of which are housing killers, like Laura Friedman's 2438. She also has a nearly identical bill, 2237. And there's there's the Alan Cortese bill, 1217 as well, that is going to be dealing with changing the rules for sustainable community strategies and how those are formed.
With all these bills, as they are presented for the first time with you and Chris, and you review everything, do you reach out to the authors and try to have some early negotiations with them on how they're impacting the building industry?
Yeah, I would say, especially ideally, you always want to contact the author before you send them a nasty gram in the form of an opposition letter. And that certainly happens, I think, with the housing killers. And maybe not so much in where we're part of a large coalition of folks. But we do reach out, whether it's before that or about the same time, maybe shortly after that, you usually let them know, because you have a relationship there that you need to at least keep civil. And I think that that's important to do that.
And is it sometimes contentious, or are people typically open to talking with you about some of the ways they can modify the bills?
It's mostly, it's not usually contentious. It's rare that it is, but it can be. And, you know, you have to always know that at some point reasonable minds may differ on, you know, the facts, the reality of things, that they don't care about the consequences of the legislation.
Yeah, well, I guess that's why CBIA exists as the unified voice for the building industry, because for us, that's a lot of hot buttons there where it makes us lose sleep for sure.
Yeah, if it's okay, what I want to mention some of the good bills, but before that, I want to just talk. I want to say this much, that there is a magical significance to two words that you use in connection with any bill, and it ends the discussion. It is the words that you use either to get people to vote for your bill or vote against your bill. And those two words are climate change. And if I am doing something to mitigate climate change, I win. If I'm making it worse, I lose. So I guess I would point out that there are three bills that are specifically focused on this. There's two dealing with embodied carbon, and these are measures that would reduce the amount of carbon contained in building materials. I see somebody has a question on that. Yes, those are the two bills, SB 1297 and AB 2446, and those are bills we are currently in discussions with those authors on. Based on our discussions yesterday, we're trying to get AB 2446 to take a more rational process approach, instead of saying this is going to be something that the home builder has to do. They, I think, understand that the first thing that needs to happen is for manufacturers to come up with lower carbon materials. You can tell us all you want to use a particular material, but if it doesn't exist, and if it doesn't work, and if it falls apart and it's going to cause more defects, then we're not going to use it. So I think there's some progress there. I also think there was progress made yesterday with SB 1297 with Mr. Cortese, who is going to be limiting that bill to it's voluntary, but it only applies to public facilities that are owned by a public agency. So that will largely take us out of that. Obviously, we do have funding requirements for some of those facilities in the form of fees. But
do you find that that's usually kind of a step in the direction they want to ultimately go by implementing something in the public sector, and then it feels easier to roll into our industry?
Yeah, there's already some provisions in CEQA and in other laws that would require us to do this today. But so far, because those materials aren't really largely available, we haven't been doing that.
Yeah.
On the climate change front, I would also say that you probably know that at the federal level, the SEC has required for publicly traded companies, or is in the process of adopting a regulation to disclose your scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions associated with your activities as a company. We have the state version of that in SB 260 by Senator Weiner, and it applies to companies with sales of over $1 billion. And so if you're in that category, you would be required by this law to disclose those scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions.
So
And
Nick, do you want to end on the high note with a couple positives? So I have a few questions for Dan as well.
sure, I'll say that AB 2705 is a sponsored bill. It's a bill that we have come up with as an effort to show how we address wildfires, and we have the data now to back up the fact that new communities, master plan communities that are done right, meaning frankly, the way a lot of folks are doing them today, have been fire tested and proven not to suffer any damage. So AB 2705 incorporates all those best practices into one bill. And it got out of local government committee this week on an 8-0 vote. So we've managed to thread that needle, I think, and hopefully it'll be a good foil against SB 12. Another bill that we are sponsoring, that's a housing creator, is AB 2605, which deals with the water quality certification process at the state and regional level, sets some time limits on it. And I think key to all of that is that for the first time, if this bill were to pass, they would have to tell us why they're denying our projects. The other bill I wanted to mention is a sponsored bill, SB 1410 by Senator Caballero. What this bill would do would be to limit the application of the VMT regulation in CEQA to just transit priority areas. These are areas within a half mile of a major transit stop. It will be up next Wednesday. It is going to take a miracle to get it out of committee. But having said that, we're working it pretty hard. And what it looks like if and when it does come out of committee, I can't say. But the efforts right now are to do that. The one thing I want to mention, because it's part of the transportation debate, is that it's become apparent that, and now it's obvious, that the environmentalists want to use VMT to charge us greater and greater fees in areas that they don't want us to build in, and use that money to subsidize projects and transportation improvements in areas they do want people to live in. So I wish them the best of luck with that, because consumers can't afford to pay more money for a house. But at any rate, that would be it.
Well, I appreciate it, Nick. That's a great summary. And one of the questions was where people can find it. Cornelius, thank you. I see he posted a link to the Housing Killers and Creators CBIA page. So appreciate that. We miss you, Cornelius. Thanks for your time, Nick. Dan, hello. Nice to see you. I wanted to ask you about schools. So with new houses comes the need for more schools. Can you talk a little bit about how funding for facilities is going? We have a huge surplus in California. Is there any chance we can use some of that money versus another school bond? What's going on that front?
A great question, and a really important one for us to try to figure out how to move forward. As you all know, as you pointed out so accurately, when we add new homes, we many times need to add new schools. And our approach the last 25 years was to float statewide bonds. But with the surplus we have, we've been making the case with the governor and the two legislative leaders, Ms. Atkins and Mr. Rendon, that it would be more cost-effective, quicker, and we believe more likely to succeed if we include this in our state budget. So yesterday or last night, they came out with the new numbers. They found another $25 to $35 billion in surplus. So for all of you who sold your stocks last year, thank you very much. You are creating the biggest surplus windfall in the history of California. And so the question, though, is a big chunk of that money has to go to school teachers and school salaries. So 40% automatically goes. The question is, can we find room in that budget for us in school facilities? We were doing really well in this discussion, and then Russia decided to attack Ukraine, and the governor got nervous about his reelection and wants to hand out gas cards right before the election. So that's an $11 billion cost and at his first offer. So we're trying to suggest maybe rich people who drive Teslas don't need the gas card. Maybe if he really wants to do it, focus on lower income families. And so we're hoping that there will still be sufficient funds within the state budget to fund schools. Last part of this, Karina, I'd say is, what does that mean sufficient? We have a $3.3 billion backlog of existing school districts. This is both new schools and modernization. So if you're doing some infill, this would include updating some of our 50-year-old schools. And then we need 1.2 billion each year going forward through 2024, at least, before we could do another bond. So that's kind of the view of the world there, Karina. And as we get closer there, I will reach out to Mr. Stretch and team, and because this is obviously applies statewide from Calexico to Eureka, and certainly the Sacramento area is one of the best growing regions thanks to the leadership of this group, and we want to keep it that way. That means we need new schools. So we'll come back and ask for your help as soon as we get a better feel after the May revision comes out right around the 10th of May. So that's kind of our current activity, Karina. Glad to go deeper there if you'd like.
Well, yesterday I read the PPIC study that talked a lot about the decline in enrollment. So I was kind of curious, how is school funding responding to the potential decline in enrollment overall?
Yeah, that's a great study because it points out everything you said, and the decline is faster than even the experts were predicting. So when we look at school facilities, we do see it in a twofold manner. The first is, new schools. So when TriPoint or KB or any of the home builders for North State, you do your 127 sales last week. Thanks, Mike, for sharing that. When those new schools come in, that still requires at least a discussion about, do we need new facilities? But with a decline, we still need funding for that because many of our schools, so my kids went to Dewey Fundamental, great school, but it's, got single pane windows, still has lead paint on the walls, still has asbestos in the tiles. And so modernization, so in the Sacramento area, I think of Arden and Watt, you see this old school that looks like a brand new school. So modernization still needs to occur, Karina, even when we have declining enrollment. Now we might consolidate two schools, but the school we consolidate into, if we can, it would be nice to update it, modernize it, put solar panels in it, improve the lead pipes so that they're actually better pipes so our kids can actually use the drinking fountains. So it's a combination of modernization and new facilities, but we are not going to need to modernize as many schools if we continue to have that declining enrollment. And candidly, our hope is some of that vacant land can go into more housing projects. So we are hoping that it's something that we could, some of our builders could step in and take that land and take something that's in the middle of a community and turn it into a good project. So those are some options, Karina. That's a really good point. We are seeing people leave our beautiful state for other states for many reasons, but primarily the cost of living, and the number one issue there is the cost of housing.
Okay, great. Don Keller has a good question I was hoping you might be able to touch on. He asked, what's the status of water? Is there enough permits for 2022?
What are the status of what's that?
Water permits for 2022?
Yeah, so that's part of the reason why we're pushing AB 2605 and just the whole water discussion, because this is something that John Norman taught us when he first came in as chairman, and I know you all know him because he chaired your local as well. It's just how difficult it is to get through this permitting process, both state and federal. So Army Corps of Engineer and the State Water Board. So 2605 is intended to expedite that review process, or at least hold it more accountable, because in some cases it takes years. We're also pushing, so we did agree to some changes in waters of the state. I mean, we kind of agreed because they were going to do it with or without us, but we asked them to staff up the water board staff to review our projects. Because one, they only tend to meet quarterly and they meet too slowly. So both Brookfield and KB have been working with us on, seeing if we can move that process faster and clearer, and just direct the resources there so it doesn't take so long. So that's part of our strategy is, when we look at making housing attainable, we see that as speeding up the process and reducing the cost. And that's kind of key, we think, to addressing California's housing policy crisis. So that's kind of one thought there, Karina.
Thank you for that. That's definitely an important one to follow. So there's a lot of regulatory issues that you are managing through. Which ones would you say the members need to be most aware of right now?
Yeah, so Nick touched on the fire issue. We've been working with the Board of Forestry on their regulations. Good news is Nick and our colleagues at 5 Point have been effective in providing some strong suggestions. They pretty much took out all of the transportation fire-related activities in the last round, but follow the Board of Forestry regulations, because that combined with the statutory issues that Nick was talking about, SB 12 and AB 2705. If those go right, you're going to be able to build in Folsom and Roseville and Loomis. If those go wrong, you're going to spend a fortune trying to prove you can. So that's a regulation to watch. The second one is stormwater runoff. And when you build a facility, a new home, if it rains, I know it doesn't happen often, but these new regulations make it very expensive to build, and basically you have to create treatment facilities on your plant, on your project as you're doing that. So we're working really hard to make that a lot more manageable. Fortunately, the worst part of it's in Southern California, fortunate as in for you in Northern California, but Tri-Point builds north and south, KB does, and many of you do. And these things, these dumb ideas do gravitate north and south depending on where they start. So we're very focused on that. Last time we touched on VMT, we're still working to make those regulations better, even if we can't do it through the statutory process. So a lot on the regulatory front, a lot that adds cost and delay, all intended through the prism of climate that Nick talked about. So Karina, we obviously are very desirous of improving our climate, but we build the most energy efficient, water efficient, seismically safe, and fire safe homes in the world. And so we think the more new homes you build, the better it is for climate. And that's really one of our mantras. One of the questions that came out is, can we find some science? We are working with Stanford University, and they have come up with the statement that we should focus on our existing housing stock, especially the housing stock built before 2000, and retrofit that through dual pane windows and better insulation, because there's 5 times more reduction in GHG if we focus on existing stock than trying to add a scintilla of improvement on our existing homes. So that's what we're trying to redraw, and Stanford has come up with some great information on that. So we do partner with Berkeley, Stanford, USC, and UCLA on the climate issues to try to find more affordable ways to build housing and still address our climate goals. And that's our strategy, Karina, on that.
That's fantastic to hear. So I guess as we close up, maybe you could share what's the best way people can get involved, be informed, and be active in these efforts.
Great question, and thank you for it, Karina. So, continue to work with Mike Stretch. He's a great leader in this space for us. He came originally from CBIA and knows this, as well as Chris Norum. We partner very closely with your team, and so we will bring to them. And Cornelius, as you know, is on the bubble. He's got insights on both sides. So thank you. Sorry, Mike, but thank you so much for letting him come our way. We are going to reach out to you as these issues come forward and ask you, like on school facilities and some of these key legislative matters, to talk to your legislators, whether it's Kylie or Cooley or Pan or Dolly or whoever it might be, because all politics are local. And when you call up and saying, hey, this bill is really important, AB 2605 will help us get our projects approved more quickly, it really does help us move the agenda forward. So we will reach out to you on that as these issues come up, and appreciate the partnership. Thanks, Karina.
I appreciate it. Dan, Nick, we really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your busy days to keep us informed, and for all you do advocating on our behalf. Real quick, I just also want to thank our sponsors, Cosentino, Dahling Group Architecture Planning, WDSLA, and Wood Rogers. We couldn't do these things without you guys. And someone's asking real quick if we could share your contact information with the membership.
Of course, yeah, glad to do that. You can just get it going to our website, but yes, we'll have Angela send that out, and glad to share our contact information. But if for some reason you lose it, just go to our website, click on staff, and you'll see my email address there and my direct phone line, as well as Nick's. So at any time, if you lose it today, in the future, you're like, hey, CBI needs to know about this, just reach out to us. And of course, anytime ask Stretch or Chris to reach out to us, or Angela, since she does everything, and we're glad to help. So thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Nick. Great job, Karina. We appreciate your service on our local BIA. So thank you again to our sponsors. Thank you, Karina. Thank you, CBIA, for all that you do. We could never make this into a 30-minute session. Who would have thought we could? It's so much information. We could go on forever, I know, but we appreciate the 30 minutes that you did provide us this morning. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.